"I want you too," said the Apache woman after the cowboy claimed, "This is my ranch, Wild West." The wind swept across the open land, carrying the faint scent of wildflowers and dry grass. Dust rose from the earth, drifting lazily in the morning air, and the distant mountains stood like silent guards over the land. It was a land of freedom, danger, and opportunity, a place where men and women came to claim a life they could call their own. Among them was Jake McAllister, a young cowboy with a strong build and determined eyes, who had recently staked his claim on a stretch of land that he hoped to turn into a thriving ranch. Jake had arrived at this land after years of wandering. Orphaned at a young age, he had learned to survive on his own, riding horses, tending to cattle, and facing the harsh realities of the frontier. Now he dreamed of building a home, planting crops, raising livestock, and living a life of independence. Every morning he rose before the sun, checking his land, repairing fences, and inspecting the water supply. It was hard work, but it was honest, and Jake found pride in the effort. He believed that this land, with its wide-open skies and untamed beauty, could finally give him a sense of belonging. That particular morning, Jake rode along the edge of his property, scanning the horizon for any signs of trouble. His horse, a strong bay named Dust, trotted steadily, carrying him across the uneven terrain. As Jake approached a small canyon near the northern border, he noticed something unusual. Smoke was rising in thin, curling streams from among the rocks. At first he thought it might be a natural fire, but as he got closer, he saw clear signs of human activity, footprints, a hastily built campfire, and scattered belongings. Jake's brow furrowed. This land was supposed to be his. No one else should be here. He urged Dust forward, moving cautiously toward the smoke. As he crested a small ridge, he saw her for the first time. She was a woman, tall and strong, with dark eyes that seemed to look right through him. Her long hair was tied back, and her clothing, though simple, was practical and made for moving swiftly through the rough terrain. She moved with confidence and ease, carrying herself as if she belonged to the land in a way that no settler ever could. There was a presence about her that made Jake pause. He had encountered many people on the frontier, but none like her. The woman looked up from gathering water at a nearby stream and met his gaze. For a moment, neither spoke. The wind seemed to carry the tension between them, rustling the grass and stirring the leaves. Jake could feel his heart beat faster. There was something in her eyes, strength, intelligence, and a quiet defiance, that both challenged and intrigued him. He cleared his throat and rode closer, keeping his movements deliberate but non-threatening. "This is my ranch," he said firmly, his voice steady but carrying a hint of caution. He expected her to argue, to leave, or to challenge him outright. After all, in the West, land was claimed by those willing to work for it, and Jake had done just that. Instead, she smiled slightly, a knowing and almost playful smile, and said, "I want you too." The words caught him off guard. He blinked, unsure if he had heard correctly. There was no aggression in her tone, yet the meaning was clear. She was not intimidated by him, and she was not simply going to step aside. Her words were both a challenge and a statement of confidence. Jake felt a strange mix of irritation and admiration. He had faced danger, wild animals, harsh weather, and even outlaws, but this calm, fearless woman stirred something within him that he had not felt before. Jake dismounted and approached slowly, keeping his eyes on hers. "You can't just come onto my land," he said, trying to regain his composure. "This place belongs to me now. I've worked hard to claim it." She shook her head gently. "The land doesn't belong to anyone," she said. "It belongs to those who respect it, and I respect it. I also know it can take care of those who know how to live with it. You may think you own it, but the land will tell you who belongs here." Her words made Jake pause. He had heard of the wisdom of the Apache people who had lived on these lands for generations. They understood the ways of the earth, the skies, and the animals in a way that settlers often did not. Jake had always been practical, relying on hard work and determination to carve out his life. But something in her voice, calm and certain, suggested that there was more to survival here than fences, cattle, and claimed boundaries. For a while they stood in silence. The wind carried the scent of wild sage and dust shifted uneasily, sensing the tension. Jake looked at the woman again, studying her features, trying to understand her confidence. She was young but carried the strength of someone who had faced life's challenges head-on. Her eyes were steady, unafraid, and intelligent. He could see that she had survived in this harsh land not by fighting recklessly but by understanding and respecting it. Finally, Jake spoke, his voice quieter, less commanding. "What is your name?" "Ahioka," she replied. Her voice was soft, yet it carried authority. "I am traveling. I have business with my people nearby. I mean no harm, but I will not be pushed aside." Jake nodded slowly, absorbing her words. He respected strength when he saw it, and Ahioka had plenty. "Jake McAllister," he said. "I'm the one who claimed this land, but I can see you know your way around it. Maybe we can find a way to coexist." Ahioka studied him carefully. She could sense his honesty, his determination, and his willingness to listen, even if only slightly. The frontier was a dangerous place, and survival often required cooperation, even between those who seemed like rivals. "Perhaps," she said, her eyes flicking toward the distant mountains. "But we will see." They spent the next hour observing each other, neither fully trusting, yet both intrigued. Jake showed her the boundaries he had marked, explaining the layout of his intended ranch, while Ahioka spoke in general terms about the land, its resources, and the paths her people traveled. Though their words were careful, there was an undercurrent of curiosity, a recognition that each possessed skills and knowledge the other lacked. As the sun climbed higher, casting golden light across the plains, Jake felt a strange sense of anticipation. He had thought claiming the land would bring him peace, a quiet life of work and solitude. Instead, he had met someone who challenged everything he thought he knew. Ahioka was unlike anyone he had ever encountered, and he felt a mix of excitement and caution. By midday, Ahioka packed up her small camp, preparing to move on, but she did so with a glance at Jake that suggested their story was far from over. "The land is not easy," she said. "It will test you. Remember that." Jake watched her disappear into the canyon, her figure blending with the shadows and light. He felt a mixture of relief and regret. Relief that the encounter had ended peacefully, but regret that the mysterious woman was leaving. He had no idea how often he would see her again, or what the future held. Returning to his horse, he reflected on the morning. The land was vast and full of challenges, but meeting Ahioka had reminded him that life on the frontier was never just about property or survival. It was about understanding, respect, and the people you met along the way. Jake felt a spark of anticipation he hadn't felt in years, a feeling that this encounter was only the beginning of something much larger than himself or his claim to the land. As dusk carried him back toward the heart of the ranch, Jake couldn't help but glance back toward the canyon, where Ahioka had vanished. The wind whispered through the grass, and for the first time the vast, untamed West seemed full of possibility, not just for survival, but for connection, understanding, and the promise of something new. The days following the first encounter with Ahioka were filled with a strange mix of routine and restlessness for Jake. He returned to his work on the ranch with the usual tasks, mending fences, feeding the cattle, checking water sources. But his mind often drifted back to the canyon, to the dark eyes of the woman who had challenged him so calmly. The memory of her voice, so confident and full of meaning, echoed in his mind. Her words, "I want you too," had stayed with him, puzzling him at first but now slowly revealing their weight. It was not just a challenge, he realized. It was a test of his character, his patience, and perhaps his heart. Jake had always prided himself on his independence. He had survived on his own for most of his life, relying on skill, hard work, and determination. But Ahioka's presence made him question the solitude he had cherished. She had entered his life like a storm, sudden, unpredictable, and impossible to ignore. The thought of her made him uneasy, yet there was a curiosity that he could not shake. Who was she really? What brought her to these lands? And why did he feel in some strange way drawn to her? Meanwhile, Ahioka had not forgotten Jake either. As she traveled with her small group through the nearby valleys, gathering supplies and trading with her people, she often thought of the young cowboy who had claimed the land. She had met many men in her life, some bold, some reckless, but none had faced her with such a mixture of confidence and humility. He had spoken his claim without arrogance, but there was firmness in his tone, a respect for strength he recognized in her. She respected that, even if she did not yet fully trust him. Their next encounter came sooner than either expected. A week after their first meeting, Jake was inspecting the northern border again when he spotted smoke rising from a familiar canyon. His heart quickened. Could it be her? Or was it someone else intruding on his land? Riding cautiously, he approached, keeping dust close and moving slowly over the uneven ground. As he neared the smoke, he saw her again. Ahioka stood near the stream just as she had days before, tending to a small fire and preparing food. This time she noticed him before he approached. Her eyes narrowed slightly, cautious but not hostile. Jake dismounted and called out, "Ahioka, you're back." She did not respond immediately. She studied him, noting the slight weariness on his face, the lines formed from days of work in the sun, and the determination in his stance. "Jake McAllister," she said finally, "you continue to work this land. I see you are serious about your claim." Jake nodded. "I have to be. This land is more than just dirt and grass. It's a life I'm building, something I've worked for every day. But I see you haven't left. Why are you here again?" Ahioka smiled faintly, a mixture of amusement and challenge. "Because the land is not finished with you yet. And neither am I." Those words made Jake pause. He sensed that she was not here to fight him, but neither was she here to leave quietly. There was a tension between them, a push and pull that neither could ignore. They were two strong-willed people, each used to facing challenges alone, and now circumstances had placed them together. Over the next hours, they talked cautiously. Jake explained his plans for the ranch, pointing to areas where he intended to plant crops and where he had built pens for livestock. Ahioka listened carefully, asking questions not to intrude, but to understand the land and the man who claimed it. She offered advice in subtle ways, suggesting where water might be more abundant, or where shelter from storms could be improved. Jake listened, sometimes skeptical, sometimes surprised at how much she knew about surviving in these lands. As the conversation continued, it became clear that their clash was not just about land. It was a clash of perspective and experience. Jake valued ownership and hard work, believing that claiming a land meant transforming it through effort. Ahioka valued understanding and respect, knowing that the land gave what it could to those who honored it and took only what they needed. They argued gently at first, voices raised only slightly, each defending their viewpoint, but there was an underlying respect that prevented the argument from turning bitter. Hours passed, and the sun moved high in the sky. Dust shifted restlessly, sensing the growing tension and unspoken curiosity. Finally, Ahioka stood and stretched, her movements graceful and fluid. "You are persistent," she said, her tone both teasing and serious. "Perhaps too persistent for your own good." Jake laughed quietly, a sound that was part amusement, part admiration. "And you are too bold for your own safety," he replied. "Most people wouldn't stand their ground like you do. They would have left days ago." She looked at him with those deep, dark eyes, and for a moment neither spoke. The wind rustled the grass, carrying the scent of sage and earth. The canyon seemed to hold its breath, as if it too were aware of the significance of this meeting. Then Ahioka spoke again, more softly this time. Strength is not just about fighting or holding land. It is about knowing when to stand firm and when to move with the world. You have strength, Jake McAllister, but do you have understanding? Jake considered her words carefully. He had survived countless hardships, but this challenge was different. This was not about cattle, crops, or fences. It was about people, trust, and respect. He realized that surviving in the West was not just about working hard. It was about recognizing who could be an ally, who could teach, and who could challenge him to grow. The conversation ended without a clear resolution, but it left an impression on both of them. Jake returned to the ranch, thoughtful and reflective. He worked through the afternoon, repairing fences and feeding the animals, but his mind kept drifting back to Ahioka. He wondered if she would return again, if she would challenge him further, or if she was testing him in ways he could not yet understand. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues of red and orange, Jake sat outside his cabin, cleaning his revolver and sharpening tools. Dusk grazed nearby, the sound of hooves on dry grass the only noise in the quiet evening. Jake thought about the strange pull he felt toward Ahioka. She was unlike anyone he had met, fearless and independent, yet full of wisdom and understanding. He realized that the frontier was not just a place of survival, but a place where people could meet, learn, and grow in ways he had never imagined. Meanwhile, Ahioka returned to her camp for the night, sitting beside the fire as stars appeared one by one in the vast sky. She thought of Jake, the young cowboy who claimed the land with such determination. There was something admirable in him, a mixture of strength, independence, and curiosity that reminded her of the young men in her tribe who had faced life with courage. She did not yet trust him completely, but she recognized that he had the potential to understand the land and her, in ways that few others could. The following days brought more encounters, each filled with cautious observation, subtle challenges, and moments of shared respect. Jake began to notice her movements on the land, her knowledge of plants, water, and survival skills. Ahioka noticed how he worked tirelessly, his respect for the land evident in every task he completed. Slowly, the tension between them began to shift. The initial challenge of ownership and territory gave way to a growing recognition of each other's strength and skill. One afternoon, a sudden storm swept across the plains, dark clouds rolling in quickly and bringing heavy rain. Jake was tending to the livestock when he saw Ahioka struggling to secure her small camp near the canyon. Without hesitation, he rode toward her, urging Dust to move faster. "Hold on," he shouted over the wind and rain. "I'll help." Together, they worked to secure supplies and guide animals to shelter. Jake marveled at her calm efficiency in the storm, her ability to move with the wind and rain without fear. She, in turn, noticed how he handled the chaos, keeping both people and animals safe with clear commands and quick action. By the time the storm passed, they were soaked, exhausted, and covered in mud, but they had survived together. As they sat catching their breath under the clearing sky, Ahioka looked at Jake and smiled. "You are not just strong, Jake McAllister," she said softly. "You are capable of more than you know. Perhaps one day you will understand what it means to live with the land, not just claim it." Jake nodded, feeling a deep sense of respect for her. "And you, Ahioka, are more than I expected. You challenge me in ways I didn't know I needed." That night, as they parted ways, both felt a quiet understanding forming between them. Their relationship was no longer just about land or ownership. It had begun to touch something deeper: trust, respect, and a hint of connection that neither could fully explain. By the end of the week, Jake found himself thinking less about defending his claim and more about understanding the land through Ahioka's eyes. And Ahioka found herself curious about the man who claimed this land with determination, yet had the capacity to learn, adapt, and respect the world around him. The Wild West was a place of endless challenges, where survival depended on strength, skill, and courage. But Jake and Ahioka were learning that it was also a place of connection, growth, and unexpected alliances. The spark that had started with a challenge, "I want you too," was beginning to grow into something neither of them could ignore, a story that was only just beginning. The days passed slowly on the ranch, but the air was thick with tension and curiosity. Jake continued his routine, repairing fences, feeding cattle, and checking water sources, but there was always a part of him thinking about Ahioka. Her presence lingered in his mind, like the echo of a song he could not forget. Every time he looked toward the canyon, he wondered what she was doing, where she was traveling, and whether she was watching him from the shadows, as though testing his every move. Ahioka, on her part, also kept an eye on the ranch. She traveled in small circles around the area, gathering herbs, checking streams, and visiting her people in nearby settlements. She was cautious, moving silently, but she observed Jake closely. She saw his dedication, his strength, and the care he put into the land. There was something admirable in his focus, something that reminded her of the young men in her tribe who had the potential to grow into wise leaders. She respected him, even if she did not fully trust him yet. One morning, a dark cloud appeared on the horizon. Jake noticed it while inspecting the far fence line. The wind began to pick up and the temperature dropped suddenly. The cattle were restless, huddling together in small groups, and Dust pawed at the ground nervously. Jake's heart sank as he realized what was coming. A storm was approaching, and it would not be gentle. He worked quickly, rounding up the livestock and securing loose equipment. The sky darkened with thick clouds, and flashes of lightning illuminated the plains in jagged streaks. Meanwhile, Ahioka was near the northern edge of the canyon, collecting water from the stream. She felt the change in the wind immediately, recognizing the signs of a storm. Her instincts told her that she needed to move to higher ground, but she also knew that there was no time to waste. She had to find shelter and ensure that she and the supplies she carried would survive the coming deluge. As the first drops of rain began to fall, Jake noticed movement in the canyon. Squinting through the sheets of rain, he recognized Ahioka's silhouette. Without hesitation, he urged Dust forward, riding toward her. The wind howled around him and the rain stung his face, but he pressed on. "Hold on," he shouted over the roar of the storm. "I'll help you." Ahioka looked up and met his eyes. For a moment she considered telling him to leave her alone to save himself. But something in his determined expression made her hesitate. He was not just another settler or intruder. He was a man willing to risk himself to help someone else. With a small nod, she allowed him to reach her. Together, they worked quickly, moving supplies to higher ground and guiding animals to shelter. Jake's strength and skill were invaluable, and Ahioka's knowledge of the land proved just as important. She directed him to natural hollows and hidden ridges that would protect them from the worst of the rain and wind. They moved with a silent understanding, their actions in perfect coordination despite having only known each other for a short time. The storm raged on, thunder shaking the ground and lightning splitting the sky. Rain soaked them to the bone, mud clinging to their boots and clothing. Yet there was a strange sense of connection in the shared struggle. Jake noticed how calmly Ahioka moved, how she seemed almost part of the storm itself, flowing with its force rather than fighting it. He admired her courage and skill, and he felt a growing respect for the woman who had so confidently challenged him weeks before. When the worst of the storm passed, they collapsed together in a small hollow, drenched, muddy, and exhausted. Lightning continued to flash in the distance, and the wind still howled through the canyon, but the immediate danger had passed. Jake and Ahioka sat close, catching their breath and letting the silence speak for them. "You are strong," Ahioka said quietly, her voice carrying over the soft patter of the remaining rain. "Stronger than most men I have met. You work hard and you survive." But strength is not everything. You must also learn to understand the land, to move with it rather than against it. Jake nodded, feeling the truth in her words. I have always relied on strength and skill, he admitted. But you've shown me that there is more to survival than just hard work. You understand this land in a way I cannot yet grasp. Ahioka smiled faintly, a mixture of pride and challenge. Perhaps, with time, you will learn. And perhaps you will see that understanding and respect can be stronger than sheer force. As the rain slowed and the sun began to peek through the clouds, they gathered the animals and supplies, ensuring that everything was safe and secure. The shared experience had changed something between them. The initial tension and suspicion were replaced with a growing trust and a deeper understanding. They realized that, despite their differences, they could work together to overcome the challenges of the Wild West. Over the following days, Jake and Ahioka spent more time together, cautiously observing each other and learning from one another. Jake began to see the land through her eyes, the subtle signs of weather, the hidden sources of water, the patterns of wildlife. Ahioka noticed Jake's dedication and ingenuity, how he applied practical knowledge and determination to every task. Slowly, they developed a rhythm, a partnership that went beyond words. One afternoon, they encountered a problem that tested their cooperation further. A young foal had become trapped near a steep incline, unable to climb to safety. Jake tried to rescue it alone, but the foal panicked and slipped, narrowly avoiding injury. Ahioka acted quickly, moving to support both the foal and Jake. Together, they guided the young animal to safety, their movements coordinated and precise. The shared effort created a bond of trust that neither could ignore. As they rested afterward, Jake looked at Ahioka with admiration. I underestimated you, he said honestly. I thought I knew this land, but you've taught me so much in just a few days. Ahioka smiled, her eyes reflecting the sunlight filtering through the clouds. And I underestimated you, Jake McAllister. You are more capable than I gave you credit for. Perhaps we are both learning from each other. Their days began to take on a new pattern. Mornings were spent tending to the ranch and livestock, afternoons exploring and understanding the land, and evenings sharing stories by the fire. They spoke of their pasts, of hardships and triumphs, of family and loss. Jake shared tales of his childhood, orphaned and alone, learning to survive in the harsh world of the frontier. Ahioka spoke of her people, of the traditions and knowledge passed down through generations, and the deep connection they felt to the land. Through these stories, they began to see each other not as rivals or strangers, but as individuals shaped by experience and resilience. The tension that had once defined their relationship softened, replaced by a quiet respect and a budding friendship. Yet beneath it all, there was a subtle undercurrent of something more, a hint of connection that neither dared to name, but both felt deeply. One evening, as the sun set behind the distant mountains, casting the plains in golden light, Jake and Ahioka sat together, watching the sky change colors. The wind carried the scent of wet earth and grass, and the distant calls of birds returning to their nests filled the air. They were silent for a long time, simply observing, sharing a moment of peace that was rare in the challenging life of the West. You know, Jake said finally, breaking the silence, I used to think surviving out here was just about being strong and tough. But now I think it's also about understanding, trust, and knowing who to rely on. Today, I learned that the land can teach you more than you expect. Ahioka nodded, her eyes thoughtful. And I have learned that people can surprise you, even when you think you understand them. Strength and skill are important, but so are heart and character. You have both, Jake McAllister. They sat in silence again, watching the sun disappear behind the horizon. The storm from earlier in the week had passed, leaving the land refreshed, the air clean and sharp. It was a reminder that the Wild West was a place of constant change and challenge, but also of beauty, growth, and unexpected connection. As night fell, they parted ways for the evening, each returning to their respective camps. Yet the bond formed through shared struggle, understanding, and cooperation lingered. Both felt a sense of anticipation for the days to come, knowing that their relationship was evolving into something neither could ignore. The spark that had begun with a challenge, "I want you to," was now growing into mutual respect, trust, and a sense of partnership. Life on the frontier was never easy. Storms, wild animals, and the unforgiving land demanded skill, courage, and resilience. But for Jake and Ahioka, it was also becoming a place of connection, learning, and shared strength. They had faced danger together and had emerged not just unscathed, but stronger in their understanding of each other and the world around them. As they each lay down to rest that night, the stars above twinkled brightly in the clear sky. The vastness of the plains, the quiet rustle of grass, and the gentle flow of distant streams reminded them that life on the frontier was both challenging and beautiful. And as they drifted to sleep, both knew that their story was only just beginning, that the Wild West held many more lessons, challenges, and moments of connection waiting for them. The days following the storm were calm but filled with an uneasy tension. Jake and Ahioka continued their cautious cooperation on the ranch, but both sensed that the peace could not last forever. The Wild West was a land of opportunity, but it was also a land of danger. Outlaws, rival ranchers, and wandering bandits were never far away, and anyone claiming land could expect challenges. Jake had always known this, but working alongside Ahioka made him see the risks differently. He admired her courage, her knowledge of the land, and her ability to anticipate trouble. For her part, Ahioka had also grown to respect Jake, not only for his strength but for his determination and ability to act wisely under pressure. The trust that had begun as cautious observation was now becoming a partnership forged through experience and shared challenges. One morning, as Jake checked the northern fence line, he spotted a group of riders in the distance. Dust rose in clouds as they approached, and Jake immediately recognized the danger. These were not neighbors or travelers. These were men seeking trouble, likely drawn by rumors of a new claim on the land. He spurred Dust forward, riding back toward the ranch with a mixture of urgency and focus. When he arrived, he found Ahioka already observing the approach of the riders. Her stance was calm but alert, her eyes sharp as she assessed the situation. "They are not friendly," she said quietly, almost as if stating a fact rather than a warning. "We must be ready." Jake nodded, feeling a rush of adrenaline. He moved quickly, organizing his small group of ranch hands and preparing defenses. He had firearms, basic barricades, and his knowledge of the terrain, but he knew that strategy alone might not be enough. Ahioka's guidance was crucial. She had an instinct for the land, knowing where to set traps, where to position themselves, and how to use the terrain to their advantage. The riders drew closer, and Jake could make out their faces, harsh, determined men with little regard for anyone else's claim. One of them called out, demanding that Jake relinquish the land. "This ranch belongs to us now," the man shouted, his voice carrying over the wind. "Hand it over or you'll regret it." Jake stepped forward, holding his rifle firmly but keeping his voice calm. "This land belongs to me," he said clearly. "You will not take it without a fight." Ahioka moved beside him, her presence steady and commanding. She did not carry a weapon, but her knowledge of the land and her confidence made her just as formidable. "They do not understand what it means to survive here," she said. "We will show them that strength comes in more ways than force." The first skirmish began as the riders tried to charge through the gate. Jake and his men held their positions, using the fences and barricades to slow the attackers. Ahioka directed Jake to higher ground, pointing out vantage points that allowed them to observe and anticipate the movements of the riders. She moved with grace, signaling to Jake when the attackers were about to make their next move. Despite the chaos, Jake found himself relying more and more on Ahioka's guidance. Her instincts were sharp, her understanding of the land unparalleled. Together, they managed to defend the ranch, using a combination of strategy, terrain, and quick thinking. The riders were forced to retreat, frustrated and beaten by a defense they had not expected. After the attack, Jake and Ahioka surveyed the land. The fence had been damaged and a few cattle had scattered, but the ranch had survived. Jake looked at Ahioka with gratitude and respect. "I could not have done this without you," he admitted. "Your knowledge and calm under pressure made all the difference." Ahioka smiled faintly. "You did not do poorly yourself," she said. "You are quick to act and willing to learn. That is a strength many men lack." The attack, though frightening, had changed something between them. They had faced danger together and survived, and the bond forged in that struggle was stronger than either had anticipated. Jake realized that his feelings for Ahioka were growing deeper. It was not just respect or admiration, it was a connection he could not ignore. Ahioka, too, found herself considering Jake in a new light. He was strong, capable, and intelligent, but he also had a heart willing to listen and learn, a rarity in the harsh world of the frontier. In the days that followed, life on the ranch settled into a new rhythm. Jake and Ahioka worked together, tending to livestock, repairing damage, and preparing for any future threats. They communicated in subtle ways, a glance or a gesture conveying what words could not fully express. Their partnership was no longer just practical, it had begun to carry a deeper emotional significance. One afternoon, while checking the boundary near a small creek, they encountered another problem. A group of wolves had been drawn closer to the ranch by the scent of livestock. Alone, Jake could have managed some of them, but the wolves were too many and too bold. Ahioka immediately took control, directing him to use the natural barriers of the creek and fallen logs to protect the animals. Together, they managed to drive the wolves back without injury. As they worked, Jake noticed the way Ahioka moved with confidence and precision, each action deliberate and efficient. He admired her strength, her intelligence, and the way she could remain calm under pressure. "You have a gift for this land," he said quietly. "You see things others cannot." Ahioka glanced at him, her eyes softening slightly. "And you have a gift for courage," she replied. "Many would have fled when the first riders came. You stood your ground and protected what you claimed. That is no small thing." Even as they grew closer, there was still tension and challenge in their interactions. They were both strong-willed, independent, and used to relying on themselves. But their experiences were slowly teaching them that survival in the West often required cooperation and trust. They began to understand that their differences were not a barrier, but a source of strength. One evening, after a long day of work, they sat together on a ridge overlooking the plains. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the land. The wind carried the scent of dry grass and the faint sound of distant wildlife. They were quiet for a long time, each lost in thought, reflecting on the events of the past days. "I never expected to meet someone like you out here," Jake said finally. His voice was low, thoughtful. "I thought I would be alone, surviving on my own, but now I feel like I have found someone I can rely on, someone who understands this land and its challenges." Ahioka looked at him, her expression unreadable at first. Then she smiled faintly, a mixture of warmth and challenge. "And I never expected to meet someone like you," she replied. "You are strong, brave, and willing to learn. That is rare in men I have met. Perhaps we are learning from each other." Their conversation was interrupted by a distant noise, a sound of hooves approaching. Both turned, alert and ready. The threat was not immediate, but it reminded them that the West was never truly safe. Jake and Ahioka stood, prepared to defend the ranch if necessary. As the riders passed without stopping, they relaxed slightly, realizing that danger could come at any time. But instead of fear, they felt a growing sense of unity. They had faced threats together, survived challenges, and learned to rely on one another. That bond was becoming something deeper, something neither could fully name but both felt strongly. In the following days, their partnership deepened further. They shared meals, stories, and quiet moments, learning about each other's pasts, values, and hopes. Jake spoke of his childhood, of learning to survive on his own, and of the dreams that had brought him to this land. Ahioka shared her experiences with her people, the lessons learned from generations living in harmony with the land, and the wisdom that came from understanding nature and survival. Through these exchanges, they developed mutual respect and a growing emotional connection. The initial tension and challenge were now replaced with trust, admiration, and a sense of partnership. The spark that had begun with Ahioka's bold words, "I want you too," was slowly transforming into a deeper understanding, hinting at feelings neither of them could fully articulate. One afternoon, as they repaired a fence near the edge of the ranch, Jake paused and looked at Ahioka. "You know," he said, wiping sweat from his brow, "I used to think surviving out here was just about strength and skill. But now I see that it is also about trust, respect, and understanding. I am learning from you." Ahioka smiled, her dark eyes glinting in the sunlight. "And I am learning from you, Jake McAllister. You have courage and determination, and you are willing to act when it matters most. That is not something I see often." As the sun began to set, they stood together, watching the plains stretch out before them. The sky was painted with shades of orange, pink, and purple, and the wind carried the scent of grass and earth. They were quiet for a long time, enjoying the moment, aware of the bond that had formed between them. The Wild West was a place of constant challenges, but Jake and Ahioka had proven that cooperation, understanding, and courage could overcome even the greatest dangers. Their partnership had been tested by outsiders, wild animals, and the land itself, and they had emerged stronger and closer for it. As night fell and stars appeared one by one in the clear sky, both knew that more challenges awaited them. But for now, they had each other, and that was a rare and powerful thing in a land as harsh and unpredictable as the frontier. The bond forged in fire, rain, and danger was now unbreakable, and neither Jake nor Ahioka could ignore the growing feelings that accompanied it. What had begun as a challenge, "I want you too," was now evolving into a connection neither of them fully understood, but both were eager to explore. The days after the last attack on the ranch were filled with a calm that felt both comforting and unusual. Jake and Ahioka moved through their daily tasks with a sense of rhythm and understanding that had not existed when they first met. The fences were repaired, the livestock secured, and the land slowly began to flourish under Jake's hard work and Ahioka's guidance. The sun rose and set over the plains, painting the sky with shades of gold and red, while the wind carried the scent of grass, wildflowers, and the distant mountains. The land seemed alive, responding to their care and respect. Jake had grown accustomed to seeing Ahioka by his side. They worked together as a team now, and there was a quiet joy in their partnership. Mornings were spent tending to the livestock, repairing fences, and checking the water supply. Afternoons were dedicated to exploring the land, mapping out resources, and learning more about the territory. Evenings were the time for conversation, laughter, and stories by the fire. In these moments, the tension of their first encounters had faded, replaced by mutual respect and a growing fondness that neither of them could deny. Ahioka had begun to share more of her knowledge with Jake. She taught him how to read the subtle signs of the land, the direction of the wind, the way certain plants grew, and how to anticipate weather changes. Jake, in turn, showed her practical techniques for managing the ranch, tending to livestock, and maintaining equipment. They complemented each other perfectly. Where one lacked experience, the other provided guidance. Where one was strong, the other was wise. Together, they created a partnership built on trust, skill, and shared effort. One afternoon, As they rode along the edge of the northern canyon, they came across a small herd of deer. Ahioka guided Jake silently, showing him the paths that the animals used to move through the land without disturbing it. Jake marveled at her understanding, realizing that she could move through nature with a grace and knowledge that he had never possessed. "You know this land better than anyone I've ever met," he said quietly, his voice filled with admiration. Ahioka looked at him, her dark eyes reflecting the sunlight. "I have lived with it my whole life," she said. "I understand its ways because I respect them. You can learn too if you are willing to observe and listen." Jake nodded. He realized that he had been too focused on claiming and controlling the land. Ahioka had taught him that true ownership came not from possession, but from understanding and harmony. Her words stayed with him, shaping his approach to the ranch and to life itself. Their days were not without challenges. The land was vast, unpredictable, and sometimes harsh. There were sudden storms, wild animals, and occasional trespassers who tested their resolve. But together, they faced each obstacle with courage and strategy. Jake's determination and strength, combined with Ahioka's wisdom and foresight, made them a formidable team. They had learned to trust each other completely, knowing that their survival depended not only on individual skill, but on their partnership. As the weeks passed, their bond deepened beyond friendship. The quiet moments they shared sitting by the fire, walking through the plains, watching the sunset, were filled with unspoken understanding. There was a sense of comfort and security in each other's presence, a feeling that neither had experienced before. Jake found himself looking forward to every day, eager to see Ahioka and to work alongside her. Ahioka, in turn, found that Jake's strength, honesty, and willingness to learn had earned her respect and admiration. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky turned shades of orange and purple, they sat together on a small hill overlooking the ranch. The wind was gentle, carrying the scent of wildflowers and fresh grass. The animals were resting in the pastures, and the land seemed to breathe with a quiet peace. Jake turned to Ahioka, his eyes serious but filled with warmth. "You know," he said, "when I first claimed this land, I thought I wanted it all for myself. I thought that surviving here meant being alone and strong, but I've learned something different. I've learned that it's not about ownership alone, it's about connection, respect, and the people you choose to share your life with." Ahioka smiled, her eyes softening. "And I've learned the same," she said. "I once believed that survival meant moving alone, relying only on myself. But I see now that strength can come from partnership, trust, and understanding. You have shown me that, Jake." For a long moment, they sat in silence, watching the colors of the sunset deepen across the plains. The wind whispered through the grass, and the distant mountains glowed in the fading light. Both felt a sense of completion, a feeling that the challenges they had faced had led them to this very moment. As the first stars appeared in the night sky, Jake reached out and took Ahioka's hand. The gesture was simple, but it carried a depth of emotion that words could not express. She looked at him, her dark eyes reflecting the light of the stars, and gave a small nod. It was a moment of understanding, a quiet acknowledgement that they were no longer two individuals merely surviving in the Wild West. They were a team, a partnership, and something more. Life continued on the ranch, but now it was filled with hope and purpose. Jake and Ahioka worked together to improve the land, planting crops, building shelters, and caring for the animals. Their efforts were rewarded as the ranch began to thrive. The soil was fertile, the water plentiful, and the livestock healthy. The land had responded to their care, just as they had learned to respond to each other. The bond between them continued to grow, strengthened by shared experiences and mutual respect. They celebrated small victories together, whether it was a successful harvest, the birth of a foal, or the repair of a damaged fence. Each success was a reminder that they were stronger together than apart. One morning, a messenger arrived from a nearby settlement, bringing news of another land dispute. A neighboring rancher claimed that Jake's land encroached on his property and threatened legal action. Jake felt a surge of frustration, but Ahioka placed a hand on his arm. "Let us handle this carefully," she said. "We have survived greater challenges. We can face this with patience and wisdom." Together, they traveled to the settlement to meet with the neighboring rancher. Jake explained the boundaries of his land, showing the surveys and markers that established his claim. Ahioka supported him, speaking confidently about their partnership, the care they had taken of the land, and the respect they had for its natural limits. The rancher, seeing their unity and determination, eventually backed down. Their claim was recognized, and the dispute was settled without violence. That evening, as they returned to the ranch, Jake looked at Ahioka with a sense of gratitude and admiration. "I could not have faced that without you," he said. "You are more than a partner in survival. You are my equal in every way." Ahioka smiled, her eyes reflecting the soft light of the setting sun. "And you are more than I expected, Jake. You have strength, courage, and a heart willing to learn. Together we can face anything." The days turned into weeks and the weeks into months. Seasons changed, bringing challenges and rewards. The harsh winds of winter tested their resilience, while the warmth of spring brought growth and renewal. Through it all, Jake and Ahioka worked side by side, learning from each other, supporting each other, and growing closer with every passing day. Their partnership had transformed into something deeper. The connection that began with a challenge, "I want you to," had evolved into love, trust, and respect. They had faced storms, wild animals, and human threats, but the greatest challenge had been learning to trust each other and to work together. Now, that trust was complete and their bond unbreakable. One evening, as the sun set over the plains, they stood together on the hill overlooking the ranch. The sky was painted in brilliant shades of orange, red, and purple, and the wind carried the scent of wildflowers. The animals rested peacefully in the pastures, and the land seemed to glow with the life they had nurtured. Jake turned to Ahioka, taking her hand in his. "I know we have faced many challenges," he said softly, "but I want you to know that I am here, and I am not leaving. This land, this life, it is better with you in it. I want us to build a future together." Ahioka looked into his eyes, feeling a warmth and certainty that she had not allowed herself to feel before. "And I want the same," she said. "We are stronger together. This land, our lives, and our hearts belong together now." They embraced, a quiet promise passing between them. The land around them, the ranch they had built and protected, seemed to acknowledge their bond. The struggles they had faced had strengthened them, and the connection they shared was now unbreakable. In the following months, Jake and Ahioka continued to build their life together. They expanded the ranch, improved the land, and cared for the livestock. They shared their knowledge with others in the community, teaching respect for the land, cooperation, and understanding. Their story became known among neighboring ranchers and their people, a tale of courage, respect, and partnership that inspired others to see that strength could come from collaboration as much as from independence. Life on the frontier remained challenging, but Jake and Ahioka faced it with confidence, courage, and love. The Wild West, with all its dangers and beauty, had shaped them, tested them, and ultimately brought them together. The land they had claimed, protected, and nurtured had become more than property. It was a home, a sanctuary, and a symbol of their bond. And as the sun set each evening over the endless plains, they stood side by side, looking out at the land that had brought them together. The wind whispered through the grass, carrying the promise of the future, and the stars above shone brightly, reflecting the life they had built. Together, Jake and Ahioka had faced the challenges of the Wild West, and had emerged not only as survivors but as partners, equals, and companions, whose story would endure as long as the land itself.